Good day everyone. We are from last group and we would like to explain about Symbolic Interactionism Theory by George Herbert Mead. And the members of our groups, they are Ulinnuha Aisya Putri, Savirra Tazkia, and me, Kurrotul Hasanah. The first explanation, please, Savirra.
Okay, so this theory about symbolic interactionism was created by George Herbert Mead. So first, George Herbert Mead was born in Massachusetts and entered Oberlin College at age of 16. And after the graduation, he earned his graduate degree from Harvard. And then he taught philosophy and psychology at the University of Michigan. After 1893, he taught at University of Chicago until his death. He pioneered the development of symbolic interactionism perspective, but he never published a book. His lectures were collected by his students and published after his death. So, what is the definition of symbolic interactionism? Symbolic interactionism looks at individual and group meaning making, and it focusing on human action instead of large-scale social structure. Symbolic interaction is the ongoing use of language and gestures in anticipation on how the other will react, or we can say it is a conversation. Symbolic interactionism tends to focus on the language and symbols that help us give meaning to the experiences in our life. Plumer, as the chief of the student of the George Herbert Mead, states three core principles of symbolic interactionism that deal with meaning, language, and thinking. So, the first premise is about meaning. Meaning is the construction of social reality. Or Plumer say that humans act toward people or things on the basis of the meanings they assign to those people or things. For example, a father of a son whose profession is teacher, the son views his father as kind and warm man. The students regard him as a firm and respected teacher, while his friends view him as funny and friendly man. Which of these interpretation is correct? The closest they come to the idea of causality is to argue that humans act on their definition of the situation. So, why the son views her father as kind and warm man? Because the situation of the son and the father in the house. Why the student view the man as a firm and respected teacher? Because the situation in the class, and while his friend view the man as funny and friendly man because the situation when he jokes with his friend like that. So an interactionist revision of the way scientists diagram is stimulus, interpretation, and response. So someone give response to other because the stimulus given by someone and how other interpret the stimulus given by someone, and then how we respond the stimulus and the interpretation we make like that. The second premise of Plumer is language, or we can say the source of meaning. This premise states that meaning arises out of the social interaction that people have with each other. In other words, meaning is not inherent in object. It is not pre-existent in a state of nature in an object. As human beings, we have the ability to name things. For example, we can design it a specific object. For example, we can say Kurrotul as a human. How we can say Kurrotul is a human? Because in our society, we have know what is human and why Kurrotul is say as a human like that. And for example, when I say that something is a table, you can also say that it is a table. When I say something is a chair, you can also state that it is also a chair. So it is an agreement of the society to name something, to name an object like that. Or in the language, the source of this source of meaning, we can also identify an action. For example, when I read, so you can say that it is reading activity. When I run, you can say that it is running activity and etc. Or it is also referred to an abstract idea. For example, crazy. How we can say crazy people? How we can say crazy person? In our society, we consider crazy person as a person who she or he talk by her or himself, laugh, and no any specific reason for that. And it happens every day and every time. But symbolic interaction is not just a means for intelligent expression, as I say before. It is also the way we learn to interpret the word. For example, I have a story and I had narrated it to my several friends and they have confused for the story. Let me read the story. A father and his son were driving to a ball game when their car stopped on the railroad tracks, and in the distance, a train whistle blew a warning. Frantically, the father tried to start the engine, but in his panic, he couldn't turn the key, and the car was hit by the onrushing train. An ambulance sped to the scene and picked them up. But on the way to hospital, the father died. Not that the father died. And the son was still alive, but his condition was very serious and he needed immediate surgery. The moment they arrived at the hospital, he was wheeled into an emergency operating room and the surgeon came in, expecting a routine case. But however, on seeing the boy, the surgeon blinched and muttered and say, I cannot operate on this boy. He is my son. Several of my friends confused about this story. Because why? Because in their mind, the surgeon is the father of the son. But in this story, I never told the gender of the surgeon. So it can conclude that the surgeon absolutely is the mother of the son, but several of my friends consider it as the father of the son. It is the we call of the way we learn to interpret the word, how the society agree, how is the agreement of the society to interpret the word like that. The third premise of Bloomer is thinking. I'm so sorry. The third is thinking. Thinking is the process of taking the role of the other. This premise states that an individual's interpretation of symbol is modified by his or her own thought process. In this premise, an inner dialogue used to test alternative, rehearse action, and anticipate reaction before responding other, or we can say it is self-talk. We naturally talk to ourselves in order to sort out the meaning of a difficult situation. But first, we need language. Before we can think, we must be able to interact symbolically. Taking the role of the other is the process of mentally imagining that you are someone else who is viewing you. For example, in the difficult situation of the people in the war country, we can imagine that we become the people in the war country. So we can feel how is the difficult, how they cannot sleep at how they sleep at the difficulty, how they cannot learn as we do in our country, and etc. So thinking is the process of taking the role of the other, so we can know, we can feel how the other in the situation to face the problem of theirs, like that. Next.
Okay. After we understand that meaning, language, and thinking are quickly interconnected, we are able to grasp Matt's concept of the self. Matt dismissed the idea that we could get glimpses of who were through introspection. He claimed instead that we paint our self-portrait with brushstrokes that come from taking the role of the other, imagining how we look to another person. Interactionists call this mental image the looking glass self and insist that it's socially constructed. Matt borrowed the phrase from sociologist Charles Cooley, that is, looking glass self. Looking glass self is the mental self image that results from taking the role of the other, or the objective self, or me. Okay. Said more formally, the Mead-Cooley hypothesis claims that individual self-conception results from assimilating the judgment of significant others. This picture is the example of looking glass self. There is a woman standing in front of the mirror. She got three images through the mirror regarding what clothes the person should wear. That is from her mother, her father, and her doctor. Her father and mother told her to wear a little skirt, but she also talked about what her doctor would say if she wore that little skirt. So, the self-image in this example from her mother, her father, and her doctor, this is a result from taking the role of the other is called looking glass. And another example. One day, Savirra came home very late from his friend's house because there was a group assignment from her teacher. Going forward, Savirra tries to come home early because Savirra believes that girls should not come home late at night. Savirra believes that because people think that girls who come home too late mean that the girl is a bad girl. We know the concept that girls should not come home too late at night because this is bad behavior and the girls who come home too late mean that the girl is a bad girl. It has developed due to the assessment of the surrounding community. This is an example of looking glacial. And the next point is Matt's concept of self. Matt's concept of self says that self divided into two parts, that is I and me. I is the subjective self, the spontaneous driving force that fosters all that is novel, unpredictable, and unorganized in the self. For example, Miss I attended prayers with her family at her home. In the middle of the event, Miss I suddenly remembered an incident that made him want to laugh. The spontaneous, unpredictable, and unorganized in the self like that is called the I, the concept I. While me is the objective self the image of self seen when one takes the role of the other. The key point is when one takes the role of the other. Me concept or the me concept is same as the looking glass self concept conveyed by Coley. As we discussed earlier, for example, when Mrs. I laughed in the middle of a group prayer, it was bad behavior, and other people thought that Mrs. I was behaving disrespectfully at the time of prayer together. And the last concept is self. Self is the part of an individual's personality composed of self-awareness and self-image. For example, from Miss I example, Miss I will try to hold back her laugh during the prayer with her family at home and try to seriously follow the prayer together until it is finished. According to me, the self is an ongoing process combining the I and the me. In the another side, there is generalized other phrase. Generalized other is the composite mental image a person has of uh, his or herself based on societal expectation and responses. Or we can say that the generalized other is an organized set of information that the individual carries in her or his head about what the general expectation and attitudes of the social group are. We refer to this generalized other whenever we try to figure out how to behave or how to evaluate our behavior in a social situation. We take the position of the generalized other and assign meaning to ourselves and our actions. For example, in Miss I's case, the generalized other was shown when Mrs. I talked about how the people around her would respond if she saw Miss I suddenly laugh in the middle of prayer. Others will think she's not serious when praying together. And if she's in someone else's position and sees other people laughing in the middle of prayer, Miss I will also think that the person is not serious about participating in prayer events and interferes with prayer activities. So, laughing in the middle of a prayer is bad behavior. This is the example for generalized other. This generalized other that affect the me of a person, like that. This generalized other will affect our behavior in society. To summarize, there is no me at birth. The me is formed only through continual symbolic interaction, first with family, next with playmates, then in institutions such as schools and others. As the generalized other develops, this imaginary composite person becomes the conversational partner in an ongoing mental dialogue. In this way, kids participate in their own socialization. The child gradually acquires the roles of those in the surrounding community. Matt would have us think of the me as the organized society within the individual. The next discussion is about, we would like to discuss about six application of symbolic interactionism. There are six different applications within the theory of symbolic interactionism. They are the first, creating reality, after that, meaningful research, next is generalized other, naming, self-fulfilling prophecy, and the last is symbol manipulating. The first, we would like to discuss about creating reality. Sociologist Erving Goffman argues that everyone is constantly negotiating with others to publicly define our identity and the nature of the situation in the creating reality application. To the extent that we interact with new acquaintances or have novel conversation with significant others, the self is always in flux. The impression of reality is a delicate and fragile thing that can be shattered. For example, from the previous example, when we participate in prayer with family, we should not talk to other people because we have to be serious in praying. However, sometimes we can talk to other people during prayer session if there is something important. For example, there is a fire due to an electrical short circuit, so we can talk and tell people who are trying to save themselves like that. And the next is about meaningful research. In meaningful research, Mead claims that research occurs through participant observation. Participant observation is a method of adopting the stance of an ignorant yet interested visitor who carefully notes what people say and do in order to discover how they interpret their world. For example, assume that Joy is an industrial engineering student. She wants to observe the problems that often occur in a company. In a company, Joy, as a researcher, can act as an employee. He can observe how employees behave at work, how enthusiastic they are, how the relationship between one employee and another employee, the relationship between employees and supervisor and leaders, complaints at work, and so on. Matt had little sympathy for tightly controlled behavior experiment or checklist surveys. The result might be quantifiable, but the lifeless number are void of the meaning the experience had for the person. Next is about generalized other. Generalized other is described as the combined mental image of others in a community, their expectation and possible responses to oneself. In symbolic interaction, in symbolic interaction, there is a tragic potential of negative responses, consequently reducing a person to perceiving themselves as nothing. The generalist other is a combination of all of the looking glass self that others give to us. Okay, and the next discussion will provide by Miss I. Please, Miss I.
The next application of this theory is that naming. Here's a partial list of epithel heard in public place over 1 year period, such as the voice we can hear like dummy, ugly, slob. If someone treat you better, then you can call it as kind-hearted people, and when someone treat you bad, you can call it as a devil or evil. For example, also you see in your government, if the leader of the country itself on our department already have an important rules in our country and they are doing such corruptions, then we never call them as a people who have to pay attention with, but we have to call them as a greedy major, right? That's we can call it as a naming or labeling itself. And then next is a self-fulfilling prophecy. One implication of the looking glass self hypothesis is that each of us has a significant impact on how others view themselves. That kind of interpersonal power is often referred to a self-fulfilling prophecy, the tendency for our expectation to evoke response in other that confirm what we are originally expected. And that is you can imagine that a lady and also a flower, it is a different. It is not the difference, it's not at how they behave, but it is how they are treated. If you're looking for the person who have a good attitude, and also that instead of the person who have a bad attitude, we as a human already prefer to interact and communicate with the good persons, right? And instead of them who are having a bad attitude. And then Symbol manipulation. The another application of this theory is that symbol manipulation. Saul Alinsky was a product of the Chicago School of Sociology at a time when Matt was having his greatest influence. Similar to Barack Obama, Alinsky became a community organizer in Chicago when he finished his grade school and applied what he learned to empower the urban poor. For example, in the 1960s century, he helped found the Wolfram organization to oppose his alma mater complicity in substandard neighborhood housing. Uh, you start with the people, their tradition, and also their prejudice, their habits, their attitudes, and all of those other circumstances that make up their life. It should always be remembered that the real organization of the people must be rooted in the experience of the people themselves. And then we have the next slide. We have the ethical reflection, reference response I. This is about how we as a human understanding about I and me develop for the current society. We already understand that the subject that are called I and me already been applied since the previous years ago, and we have to notice that European Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas agrees with Matt that the self is socially constructed, and Levinas used the term ethical echo to design the responsibility he believed we all have to take care of each other. That ethical echo has existed since the beginning of the human history and is summed up the words I'm a my brother's keeper and so on, etc. The way each of us meets the obligation the way each of us meets that obligation shape our eye. Levinas says that every time we gaze at the face of other, we are reminded of our caretaking ethical requirement to actively care for all people because we have that kind of I and me subject. Levinas suggests that the best way to encountering the other is not even to notice the color of his eyes, but also how we respond, how we treat another people. Face to other in here is a human signpost that points to our ethical obligation to care for the other before we care for ourselves. For example, that Levina is clear about the burden that comes with looking at the face of other. For example, my word is rupture, my contentment is interrupted, I'm already obligated. Here is an appeal from which there is no escape or responsibility instead of being hostage. It is looking into the face to the other that reveals the call to a responsibility that is before any beginning, decision, or initiative on my part. I'm responsible for thus. I'm responsible for the other without waiting for the reciprocity itself. It is also called as a human altruism. When we are taking care about someone else, then someone else will taking care about us in the future or later. In the next slide, setting gold standard for the three interpretive criteria. Viewing theory as a testable explanation of directly or indirectly observable social regularities, Matt's ideas are seriously flawed. That's the judgment of Indiana University as an objective theory that must meet scientific standard for prediction and also the testability itself. But Matt's work was highly interpretive and deserved to be evaluated on the six criteria for good interpretative theories offered in Chapter 3 in a book weighing the words. But we are not talking about it. We are only talking about the clear generalization of this. Let's start with a clarification value that which meets already exceedingly well, drawing upon William James, John Dewey, and other pragmatism. Maths proclaim that humans are free to make meaningful choices on how they act when facing problems, and his critique strictly reveals what fascinated me as an undergraduate and graduate student was in a part the dignity accorded humans by seeing them as an important determiners of their life rather than the pure product of conditioning. Of course, this freedom and dignity are dependent upon our ability to communicate. But certainly, math offers a marvelous new understanding of people by showing how humans socially carefully construct their concept of self as well as the society influence, yet doesn't dictate the construction project, we also can gain a new appreciation of human diversity from the extensive ethnographic research in his theory inspire that describe individual as similar situation in responding strikingly different ways. And the conclusion is that symbolic interactionism doesn't meet the other two criteria for an interpreted theory nearly as well as the four discussed above. Given Mead's personal effort to help displace and distress amidst urban industrialization, it's puzzling that Mead's theory doesn't call for the reformed society. His theory says little about power or emotion, realities that a community or organization deals with every day. But also, in contrast to aesthetic appeal, most readers of mind, self, and society get bogged down in the baffling array of ideas that Matt tried to cover. The theory of fluid boundaries, vague concept, and undisciplined approach don't lend themselves to be an elegant summary. There is no cliff note for this one. Perhaps Matt was precise when he presented his ideas in class, but their exact meaning was really blurred in years before his student compiled the manuscript. Whatever the explanation, the theory suffered from a lack of clarity. And then next, uh, here is the critic for the symbolic interactionism theory that we are already learned. The first is based on the scope category. It has no boundaries at all, too vague and broad as I said before. Like it has no framework. We are not only talking about the symbolic interactionism, but we are talking about the ground which is has no boundaries at all. It covers too much ground that we cannot understand it specifically. And then based on the utility itself, it focuses too much on the individual, ignores physical reality, and also fails to explain the emotion and self-esteem. And about the testability, broad scope renders concept vague, many nominal concept reduce testability. And also the SIT is intended as a framework, not the theory itself. For the next slide will be explained by my friend.
Okay, for the last slide is about evaluating the symbolic interactionism based on 7 criteria in evaluating theory. So, the first theory is parsimony. So, the symbolic interactionism can state to the simplicity explanation that is meaning, language, thinking, and also meets concept of self. So, the symbolic interactionism is fulfill the parsimony criteria. The next is logical consistency. In this criteria, we know that in symbolic interactionism, each principle supports each other. For example, in Mead's concept of self, that there are I concept and me concept. The I and me concept created when we have known about language, thinking, and meaning theory in the first premise of Bloomer. So the symbolic interactionism is fulfill logical consistency. The third is test of time. So symbolic interactionism is approximately has been 1 century used by all people in the world. So it is test of time. So the test of time is fulfilled by this theory. Okay, thank you. That's all from our groups. And sorry for every mistake we have made. And when you have any question, you can just us to us. Thank you.